Another one of our first Thursday events called Policing the Police to Protect and Serve. Our monthly events are brought to you via Zoom, and they will be posted, they're recorded, and they're posted on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So we encourage you to spread the word. If you have seen the program and you like it, please tell your friends. It's something we greatly appreciate. And we do our monthly events. We used to do them live before the pandemic, and we're kind of currently in the Zoom mode, and not sure exactly where that's going to go in the future, perhaps back to hybrid or something. But we're still here in Zoom, and we are very glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. I would like to very quickly introduce our president, Karen Houston, and Karen has a few announcements to make as we begin our meeting. So Karen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Phil, and welcome to everyone who's here tonight. Thank you to our wonderful guest speakers. We appreciate you so much coming on, enlightening us about what's happening out there. I just want to thank, first of all, our Action Projects Committee and the person who's responsible for getting this program together, Miss Vicky and Poco. She did a wonderful job of doing everything pretty much on this program tonight. And I want you to also know that we have these programs once a month, first Thursday, and we will be having another one. It'll be July 6th, and it's entitled Paradise Lost, Neglecting the Disabled. And you can go and find all this program and others on our website, scpaflorida.com. That's scpaflorida.com. We look forward to seeing you all more. And I'm going to turn this over to our membership and contributions treasurer, Carol Becker, and she'll give you a bit about how you can become a member of SCPA.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Carol Becker, treasurer, and you can go to scpaflorida.com, and our website is there. Individual memberships are $25, family $35, and students are $10. You can either pay with a credit card on the website, or you can mail a check to SCPA PO Box 412, Melbourne, Florida 32902. That address is on our website. We'd like to have you as a member. It helps our community, and welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Carol. We appreciate that. And by the way, we are offering this year a gift if you do decide to join. We have t-shirts. We've got a couple of them. Our Space Coast Progressive Alliance t-shirt, which is really neat art there. We've got another logo t-shirt that's available. To be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure how we work out getting the right sizes and that sort of thing. But if you join us, we'll contact you and work that out. But t-shirts are available if you choose to join the SCPA. We really do thank you for that. I should hand it back over to Karen to see if you have anything else you'd like to add.
Yes, I would. And one of the things that we always do on these programs is that we ask our panelists to give us action items at the end of the program. And so we're asking all of you, all of our speakers tonight, to give us an action item. And we ask our guests that are here watching this program to please act on those items. Don't just take this information and go back home and say, wow, that was a good program. Share it with everybody if you don't mind. And so we're looking forward to this program tonight. This is not a police bashing program. This is something about that's necessary. We need to get enlightened on things that are happening. We have ties with police groups all the time. So it's not about that. It's about what has happened, and some things need to be checked out. So anyway, let's get on with the program. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you. Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate that. And that's a very good point. Our event is called Policing the Police to Protect and Serve. And for those of you that are just joining us, we do welcome you. The Space Coast Progressive Alliance over the years has actually held a number of different events for different reasons, looking at homeless, drug abuse, that sort of thing. And we've always been very, very happy to have representatives from our police community, local police chiefs, and that sort of thing as spokespeople. And in fact, we were scheduled to have our police chief, Evander Collier from the city of Cocoa tonight with us. Unfortunately, he had a scheduling conflict, just let us know a couple of days ago that he was not going to be able to make it. So my apologies to those of you that if you were looking forward to seeing Chief Collier coming on tonight, he will not be able to join us, but in his place, we have a wonderful speaker, Quinn Diaz from the ACLU of Florida. Quinn is a strategy and special projects associate from the ACLU, and he has been working over in Tampa with the Citizens Review Board, looking over police issues in that area. The ACLU has been working with them to try to help with issues in Tampa, and I'm sure Quinn is going to give us a good briefing on that. Starting off our panel tonight will be Jessica Travis. She's an attorney. She is with defendbrevard.com, and that's a little note that you want to make to yourself if you ever need an attorney, or if you ever have an issue legally. I highly recommend defendbrevard.com. She's also the secretary for the Brevard Bar Association and the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast. Very well connected here in the Space Coast, and we're so glad that she's with us. Also, an old friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. We've had him in our programs before, and that is Alton Edmond. He is an attorney, a victim advocate, a former assistant public defender here in Brevard County, and just an all-around great guy. We've these three panelists, Jessica, Alton, Quinn, are going to be looking at these very, very, very difficult issues of policing. Now, not just here in Brevard County, not just in Florida, but all across our nation. We know that there have been problems. And the advent of the smartphone has made what used to be just verbal reports of police abuse or issues with police into a visual, a very a dramatic thing. We now get to see things that we've never seen before. Some of them have been horrible. Some of them maybe not so bad. We know that we need police to keep our communities safe. We depend on good policing in our communities all across our nation, frankly, all around the world. But how do we get there? We hope that police are honest and fair and treat people with respect, and we hopefully return that to them. But there are some communities, obviously, where people fear their police. And how did we get there? How do we get out of this? I don't need to go into details on this because, frankly, our panel will be talking to you about it. And after the panel is done, we have a VIP guest speaker, Dr. Joyce Hamilton. She is the Senior Strategy and Special Projects Advisor for the ACLU of Florida. Again, an old friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, a brilliant woman, a brilliant speaker. And she'll be just here to add a few thoughts of some of her perspective on what's happening in this topic. And then we're going to open the floor to you, our guests. If you're with us on Zoom, we're going to be, after the panel, we'll be opening the floor, and we'll be encouraging everyone to raise their hand and to ask questions of our panelists. I do encourage all of our panelists to talk to each other as well during the Q&A session. I think it's really neat when they can look at each other's experiences, ask each other questions. But before we begin our panel tonight, I always ask if there's anyone that has a community announcement. We like to give our community members 1 minute if you want to take it to announce anything, any events that are happening locally. And in order to raise your hand, and this will be for either for this period with our community announcements or during the Q&A, Zoom gives you a feature. It's called reactions. Look for the little reactions button at the bottom of your screen, whether you're on a computer, on an iPad, on a phone. Click on reactions and you'll find a little place where you can raise your hand, and that allows us to spot you right away. So again, anybody that has a community announcement, this is your chance. Please raise your hand. We'll call on you, give you a minute to make your announcement. I see we have Anthony Yance. Anthony, it's great to see you, my friend. Welcome, and you have the floor for a minute.
Well, hello. Hello, Brevard. How is everybody doing today? Hopefully
to see you,
very,
buddy.
very well. Listen, I am running for State House District 33 here in Brevard County. The seat that's currently being held by Mr. Randy Fine himself, or not so fine, however you'd like to put it. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask. I make myself as available as possible, but we definitely need change here in Brevard.
Well, thank you, Anthony. If you could please do us a favor and post your information in our chat room for folks that are here on the Zoom, that's very helpful. And do you have a website that people can go to get information about you?
Absolutely. It is Stand with Yance, my last name, YANTZ.com. Standwithyance.com.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And
Thank
I
you.
see I see we've got Darlene Hillers. Darlene's got your hand up. You've got the floor, Darlene, for a minute. And you are muted, by the way. If you can unmute yourself.
Oh.
There you go. We got you.
You got me? Okay. All right. I'm working with the Florida Right to Clean Water Initiative, and we have an event tomorrow evening in Cape Canaveral. It's their first Friday event, and there'll be a lot of vendors there and delicious food trucks and a live band. And the Florida Right to Clean Water, we will have a canopy and a booth there. So please come on over and have a good time and stop by and sign our petition for the right to clean water if you haven't already done so. The event starts at 6 o'clock in the evening, and it'll be in the downtown area near the recreation center and the library. And we hope to see you there. And it'll be a good time. And by signing a petition, you'll be doing a good thing. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And if you also have the ability to post into our chat with that information, we'd appreciate that as well. I know that there are a couple of interesting events that are coming up. A Juneteenth event in Cocoa. I think that is June 10th. I'm not certain about the date down in Old Cocoa. There's several other important events, and so we like to keep that sort of thing up on the Space Coast Progressive Alliance website as well when we can on our little calendar. So if is there anybody else that has a community announcement that they would like to make before we proceed with our program? Well, it looks like we're going to go right into it. Oh, we do have one. Alton, you've got an announcement for us. One of our panelists got an announcement. Go ahead, please, Alton. You have the floor.
Yes. So you were talking about Alton Edmond here for those that don't know who I am. You were talking about Juneteenth events. The Juneteenth event, I believe, out in Mims, Miss Sonia Millard and them are putting together a Juneteenth event on June the 17th. And that'll be out at the Moore Museum, I believe. But you would have to check to get more specific information. But I know for sure it's on the 17th, and I believe that it is at the Moore Museum out in Mims. And that evening of the 17th, and I, among a lot of things that I do, I am a promoter for combat sports. We have an event going on the 17th, a fight, and I will be fighting. But part of the proceeds will be donated to several nonprofits that benefit children here in Brevard County. We're donating $1,000 to the Brevard County Stars, who teach underprivileged girls how to play volleyball, as well as the Boy Scouts troop that helps young men with mentoring and things like that in Cocoa and Rockledge. So feel free to check us out.
Thank
put
you,
it in
Alton.
the chat.
Hey, I appreciate that. And if for all of our guests, if you have never been up to visit the wonderful facility, the Harry and Harriet Moore facility in Mims, the museum, it is a beautiful. I was just up there, been there several times. I was just up there last weekend, and it is worth the trip. If you've never been to visit that facility, it's an important part of our Space Coast history. Every citizen of this county should go there. And if you've got kids, they should see that, learn the story, and understand where we've come from. Thank you again, Alton. I appreciate it. And for those of you that have just joined us, this is the Space Coast Progressive Alliance First Thursday event, Policing the Police to Protect and Serve. We're examining issues of policing in our county, in our states, and across our country. And I'm going to turn the floor right over to our first panelist, Jessica Travis, attorney, defendbrevard.com, secretary of the Brevard Bar Association and the League of Women Voters from the Space Coast. Jessica, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, great. First of all, I want to commend everyone for taking time out of, I know what is a busy schedule. It's hard to do what I call these extracurricular things, but these things are so important. And so I applaud everyone for attending this. Just to let you know a little bit about me, I have been an attorney now for 24 years. Most of that is criminal defense, primarily practice high-level serious felonies and appellate law at this point when it comes to criminal defense. I'm originally from Kansas, and I practiced in Kansas City for about 10 or 11 years before I moved here, and I've been in Brevard for the last 11 years, and I have my own practice. And it wasn't until I came to Brevard, when I initially came to Brevard, I was a public defender, and Alton and I were in the same office, and so we know each other very well, so I'm glad we're doing this together. But after a while, obviously, I went into private practice, and I had my own firm doing the same thing that I did in Kansas City. However, what I didn't do in Kansas City is something that I think is greatly needed here in Brevard County. And that is to hopefully act as a check or a balance on some of the things that I see as problems here specific to Brevard County that honestly I honestly had never really encountered before. And if you're not on mute, could you mute yourself? Okay, I think we're good. So as I've been in Brevard County, I have branched out into other areas of law, personal injury, civil rights, public records, and things of that, and victims' rights. And I got to tell you, as we all probably know here, it's pretty concerning here in Brevard County. And so I get a lot of calls. Most of my calls are the police did me wrong, or they were mean to me and I want to sue. And unfortunately, I do turn down the majority of them. And so I wanted to explain a little bit about what the hurdles are of actually prosecuting the police in Florida and specific to Brevard County, so that people are aware of, I think, what the changes need to be. So I have a little presentation here. Let me see if I can screen share, right? Let me see if this works. Da-da-da.
You should. There we go. It's coming up.
Okay. Now, can you see this? Don't worry about looking at this in detail. It's more of a guide for me. But
We've got it.
The point is, this is kind of a very simplistic flowchart of what it takes to actually bring a case. And as you can see, in its simplistic form, it is actually quite complicated. When someone calls me, the first thing that I'm evaluating, and this comes from, I don't know if you've heard of some of the cases I've done. I was one of the attorneys for Florida Today when they sued for the Gregory Edwards video to be released from the sheriff. I currently represent Jennifer Jenkins in her public records lawsuit. I was one of the attorneys that sued the county commissioners on behalf of sex offenders because sex offenders could not attend county commissioner meetings, yet the county commissioners were passing laws making sex offender ordinances more strict, and we actually settled that, and that was a First Amendment claim. So here in Brevard, I branched out And a lot of times I am brought in as local counsel by outside attorneys because Brevard is its own animal. And if they are not on the ground, they're not going to know how it's going to go. So, but when someone calls me, and unfortunately, obviously a lot of people have bad experiences with the police. And a lot of people say to me, well, Jessica, you're just anti-police. That's not the case. I'm pro good police. And the only way that we get good police officers is if we have checks and balances. But when someone comes to me, I evaluate who they are and if they're going to make a good plaintiff. And that doesn't mean whether or not that they were harmed in any way. I'm going to give you an example. I'm not going to try not to talk about any of my pending cases, but you probably know that I have a lawsuit currently against the sheriff for the Wheel of Fugitive case. I have a client who was featured on the Wheel of Fugitive when in fact he wasn't a fugitive. My client turned himself immediately in when he found out that he had a warrant, was in custody when he was ran on the Wheel of Fugitive, and then was lawfully released and his case resolved when he continued to be ran on the Wheel of Fugitive. And when he went to get a job, he was hired. And on the way into work on the first day, they said, don't bother, we saw you on the Wheel of Fugitive. He freaked out, thinking he was going to get a vigilante arrest, trauma, stayed in his house, etc. So we have that suit. And one of the reasons why, I took that case is if you look at my complaint, I attached about 7 pages of other people who were featured on the Wheel of Fugitive when they were either in custody or had lawfully been released or the warrants otherwise resolved. But my client in that particular case makes a good plaintiff. He's determined. And other than that legal snafu that he had at that time, which was a case that was ultimately dismissed, he doesn't have a lot of criminal history. So I'm hoping that he is a person that is likable and determined rather than someone who's
Judicial Circuit Court. One is a personal injury, one is a...
Okay, can you mute yourself? All right. Yeah, if you're not on mute yourself, please, just because we get talking over then. All right, so one of the reasons why he potentially makes a good person is he's going to stick with it. And this is a case where he already has faced a lot of backlash. And so when I am evaluating someone that comes in, I gotta see, are they someone that's going to stick with it and they're going to help me in their case? Because when you file a civil lawsuit, you're going to have to fill out interrogatories, you're going to have to produce records, you're going to have to be deposed. And if that is not your thing, you have difficulty sticking with it, or it's too emotionally traumatizing for you, then a lawsuit might not be the best avenue. And so I'm evaluating that when someone comes in. I am also evaluating, and I hate to say this, what the damages or the injuries are. Because if someone has minor injuries, they might technically have a lawsuit, but that means on the back end, there may not be that much money. And I'll get to why that is important here in a second. And so a lot of times I have to tell people, look, I hear you. I understand that you were wronged, but this is a little flippant, but sometimes I say to somebody, unless it's on video or somebody's broken, shot, or dead, it's going to be pretty hard to prove your case and get a significant recovery for you, because there's such limitations on how much money people can get. These cases are so difficult. So that's something that I'm looking at. Also looking at the evidence, talked about video, eyewitnesses are the best. I had a case with Coco that we settled, which my client was accused of shoplifting. Of course, she was a Black woman, she was not shoplifting. And they rolled up and they tased her and arrested her and drove her to the Coco Police Department with the taser wires hanging out of her body, stuck in the door of the cop car. Then they pulled the video at Walmart and realized that she was not shoplifting. Both got the body cam before that was destroyed. They only keep body cam for a certain amount of time, if they keep it at all, or if they have body cams, and her friend filmed the whole thing. So that was a good case that we were able to get resolved. But if we don't have that, and it's just a police officer's word against your word, that makes the case pretty hard to prove. And then I'm looking to see what the cause of action is and whether or not it'll survive a motion to dismiss and whether or not it's financially worth it. So let's talk about that. There's different ways to bring an action against the police. You can bring it in state court, you can bring it in federal court, you can bring it in both. Meaning, if you have both a state and federal cause of action, you bring it in the federal court. And the standards are different. You can see here, if you can sue in state court under a specific statute that says that agencies and police departments can be sued for torts, meaning battery, unlawful arrest, things of that nature. A police officer can personally be sued if he steps outside the scope of his duties or he acts with malice or bad faith. And so a lot of times you'll see these complaints, these lawsuits are drafted, they sue the agency and the police officer personally. Well, maybe not all of those survive, but we throw everything in. We sue the officers involved and the police department. And then also we have this federal cause of action. We've all heard of 1983 actions. And basically, if a federal or state actor violates a constitutional right, you can bring a suit under 1983. There's some other ways to bring suit, but that's the basic. What is my cause of action? You don't always have a federal cause of action. For example, the Wheel of Fugitive case is a defamation case, and there's no federal right to not be defamed. So that's a state case only. It's not a federal case. And the reason why this is important as an attorney is that the next two things that I look to, you see I have a box here, is it financially worth it? And will it survive the motion to dismiss that's ultimately going to come? Both of these are things that you kind of have to consider at the same time. On state claims, this is one of the reasons why it is so difficult. You are capped or limited on the amount that you can recover. For one individual person, it's $200,000. If there's more than one, it's $300,000. And then an attorney is capped at 25% of that. There's exceptions. The legislature can approve excess. That never happens. The other exception that does often happen is that if there is insurance in excess of $300,000, most police departments carry up to $1 million of insurance. But if they don't, the attorney is limited. The most they can get is for a single person is $50,000. And so unfortunately, as an attorney, you have to make a business financial decision and have this analysis, because people come to me, they often don't have the money to float the case. And they want me to do it for free on a contingency basis, meaning I get paid on the back end. That sounds great, especially if somebody is greatly harmed, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But in the meantime, I, as the attorney, am carrying the case for 2 or 3 years and putting in hundreds of hours that I may or may not get paid on. And in some circumstances, the most that I could get is $50,000. That sounds cold. That might sound like a lot of money, but it's often not once you break it down. I'm paying staff and by the hour, et cetera, et cetera. So that sounds horrible, but I want to do good for people. And what part of me doing good for people is I have to be a smart businesswoman. And because the Florida legislature has capped these amounts and limited people, limited attorneys, that's why you find it so difficult to find attorneys that are willing to take this case. This $200,000 cap has been the same since they passed this law, 30 some years ago. And the only increase that they've ever done is to add the $300,000. I think they added that in 2010. And so the legislature, they passed this law that said, okay, yes, we can be sued, agencies can be sued, and police officers can be sued. But guess what? You're capped, and attorneys, you're only going to get this percentage. And so effectively, they're putting their thumb on people who are trying to get justice. And so that's one of the things that I have to explain to people. Now, federal claims, there is no cap. And if you are a prevailing party, you can sometimes get attorney's fees. But again, as an attorney, you're carrying the case 2, 3, 4 years, and you're taking a huge gamble. And so the system is really set up to put a lot of hurdles in front of you. The main hurdle is this portion about police immunity. We hear about this all the time, right? We all see something on the TV, something goes wrong. They're like, why don't they sue? They're so going to sue. They're so going to get money. Not so fast. The police are immune. They don't have absolute immunity, despite the fact that on the Wheel case, some people think that they get absolute immunity, which means they can do whatever they want without repercussions. Police officers have qualified immunity. And practically speaking, what qualified immunity means to me as a lawyer is I need to assume that the case is going to get dismissed unless I can prove a couple of different things. I have to prove that the officer violated a constitutional right that was clearly established. That seems like a no-brainer, but clearly established usually meant there's another case like this in the past, like almost exactly what these kind of facts. So if I have a brand new novel case, I might have trouble getting over that. The other thing is they'll look to see whether or not the officer acted in the scope of his duties and he acted with objective reasonableness. Now, the problem is what is objectively reasonable to you and I it's a different standard for police officers. And practically speaking, as I've been reading cases, it seems that the courts, even though they don't say this, they give the officer's actions a presumption of objective reasonableness. And they almost put it on us as the plaintiff, if I'm the attorney and my client, a duty to prove that they were not reasonable. For example, we fought to get the video of Gregory Edwards released. We all generally knew what happened to him. In case you don't, he was a veteran going through a PTSD incident. A couple days before Christmas, he and his wife, who was 8 or 9 months pregnant, went to Walmart. He jumped in to a truck of a charity worker who was collecting stuffed animals. They got into a tussle. The police were called. His wife said, look, he's been going through some PTSDs, two tours overseas, Army medic. She was a veteran as well. And they take him off and she thinks that he's going to Circles of Care or something like that. Instead, they take him to the jail. And at the jail, the next thing she knows is that she's getting a call that he's at the hospital and he's unconscious. And it wasn't even explained to her until much later that he was unconscious due to use of force, not due to some mental health issue. And we all knew that, before the lawsuit was filed, Florida Today had done very good investigation, done public records requests. We knew there was a use of force, meaning a struggle of some sort that ended up in him being restrained, but we didn't really know. There was a lot of speculation that he had really been beat down and, it was going to be horrific and graphic. It was horrific and graphic. I don't think it was what a lot of people thought it was going to be. I still remember getting the video. When I came into the case, I told the out-of-county attorney, this is the way it's going to go. And it actually went exactly the way we thought it was going to go. We finally got the video. It was delivered to my office like at 6 o'clock on a Friday or something. And I held it in my hands and I realized I was probably the first person in Brevard County outside police department that was going to see this. And I watched it. It wasn't the beatdown that a lot of people thought that it was going to be, but it was still horrific to me that someone could be treated that way, veteran or not. And the thing that put it over the edge for me personally, because I've seen in my career hundreds, maybe thousands of bad police civilian interaction videos, was that when they, fought with him and beat him and pepper sprayed him and tased him and put him in the restraint chair with his hands behind his back in a position to where his head could only go up, and they put a spit hood on him without decontaminating him. Then they put him in a room where he went unconscious. And the first thing that they did when they realized that he had gone unconscious was to try to get the taser probes out of his butt. They had strapped him in the chair sitting on the taser probes. To me, that moment in time indicated to me there was no way in my mind that they could say that their conduct was objectively reasonable. Because at that moment in time, I thought that that was punitive, that they were just trying to punish him. But if you followed that case, it's been dismissed by the federal court because the court found that their conduct and their response to his PTSD was reasonable. And they found that somehow even though there was no audio on the video, that since he didn't cry out for help, etc. And I've written an article about it. A little blurb about it. You can find it on my website, which is defendbrevard.com. That the officer's conduct was reasonable. And so I use this as an example. I mean, not only is I think that that's a horrific and wrong outcome, because there were a lot of facts in dispute as well. And so the court should have never dismissed it prior to it going to jury. And I disagree that it was reasonable, but I use that as how difficult it is to win these kind of cases. How high the hurdles are for attorneys to fight these fights, and how it breaks my heart often that when people call me to talk about their situation, that I have this mental hurdle, which is the Gregory Edwards case in my head, knowing if I can't get this case over that, I'm never going to win it on a motion to dismiss. Now, so they widely define the objectively legal reasonableness, and I think they give officers the benefit of the doubt. And they give them the benefit of the doubt as well when it comes to scope of duties. You'll hear sometimes, and if you read some of the filings on the Wheel case, I haven't found my response yet, so I still got some things coming on that. But there is a line of cases that says officers are immune for actions within the scope of their duties. And traditionally, I mean, that's defined as traditional police functions. And you'll hear the phrase discretionary function. I really don't know. To this day, I've read hundreds of cases on discretionary function. I don't know what discretionary function means. And in fact, the federal courts have kind of done away from that distinction. The 11th Circuit, which is over Florida, looks to see, did the officer have the right to do what he did? And did he do it in a manner or a way that he had the right to do it? But Florida still has this discretionary function thing that is really this weird nebulous thing that is hard to define. And so once again, we see police officers getting basically the presumption that whatever they did is within the scope of their duties. That's the argument from the sheriff's department on the Wheel case.
You're down to 1 minute. 1 minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's part of that. So let me get to the second page. So you get the point. It is very difficult for an attorney to win these kind of cases. And so what can we do about it? Obviously, the slow answer is to change the immunity laws. That's not going to happen anytime soon. I wanted to talk a little bit about the problems that I see in Brevard specifically and what you could do about it. Obviously, we all have a lot on our plate, and you all are already here in a meeting. So you know that the first step is to go to a meeting and get involved in something. But the main problems that I see in Brevard County are public records. There's a lot of blocking on public records, and we need transparency to know what's going on. We don't even know the sheriff's budget in this county. And we have a lot of officials that are not staying within their lane. And we have a lot of inconsistent charging. You might also know that I did the Passion Lucas case. Passion was a Black pedestrian who was killed by a white woman driver who was well over 2 times the legal limit, and they only charged her with misdemeanor DUI. Yet I've seen people of color charged with DUI manslaughter. I represent victims as well. I represent victims who have gone into the state attorney's office and said that they have been victimized, drugged, sexually assaulted. They still only charge the person with a misdemeanor. There's some sort of weird cronyism thing that is going on, and we need to be aware of that when we look at our elected officials. So you can see here that my main things that I think we need to be focused on are body cams and the citizen oversight committees, which I won't go into since I know somebody's going to talk about that. So body cams and that, because we need to get involved. I also want people to stop trying to get out of jury service. That is the second most patriotic thing I think that we can do, is to serve on a jury. And so I could go on and on about the things that I think we need to reform in Brevard and how we could do it, but I know I've run out of time. Do you want me to tell my action item?
Yes, absolutely. If you would, please.
My action item is I want everyone here to think about something in Brevard County that they wish they knew more about, some sort of government action, something that's going on with the school board, and I want you to do a public records request. I want everyone here to get used to doing a public records request, and it's something that should be very easy, but lately there are a lot of hurdles that are put in front of people. The hurdles are delays, and the hurdles are excessive costs. And I think Alton can speak to that. I know he has had that issue. And I just want everybody to exercise that right to find out something. And if for some reason you have a big problem with it, I want you to let me know. Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that very, very thoughtful and in-depth presentation, Jessica. And if you could give up the screen again for us, we appreciate that. And I believe that Alton actually wanted to add something in there just at the last second. If he's got a question for you, if you could, I'll tell you what, our next speaker, let me just do this. We're going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, which will be Alton Edmond. And Alton is an attorney and a victim advocate, former assistant public defender, well known to our Brevard community. He's a good friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. We've had him on our panels before. And I believe that you have a question for Jessica. Do you want to ask that question right now before you begin your program?
I believe that it was Mr. Yance that raised his hand because I didn't have a specific question. Mr. Anthony Yance had a question.
Anthony's hand is up. Anthony, would it be possible to hold your question until the Q&A section, or do you want to do it right now? Okay, Anthony's gonna hold until they get to the Q&A, in which case, handing it right over to Alton. Thank you again for being here for us. We really do appreciate that, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much for having me. So I think I'll introduce myself a little bit because what I do in Brevard County in terms of my intersection with policing and the community goes far beyond the brief biography that you've been given in terms of me being a community advocate and a former public defender. However, many of you first came to know me when I was fired from the public defender's office on February 1st, 2017, first day of Black History Month, for wearing a Black Lives Matter tie to work. But I started my own law firm on February the 3rd, 2 days later, and began to work for myself and work in this community. Since being fired from the public defender's office, I have really thrown myself into community service. And so I serve as chairman of the board for Emma Jewell Charter Academy, where I help the village to raise the child. I am a graduate of Lead Brevard, class of 2019, best class ever. I am the chairman of the board for the Cocoa Police Department Citizen Advisory Committee. And so I see and work with the community as well as Chief Collier of the Cocoa Police Department on a regular basis. And in fact, we just had a meeting last week where we discussed different disciplinary issues and actions as it relates to Cocoa police officers right here. And I'm on a lot of other boards and such, but I will not bore you with all of those details. I'll go into just kind of talking about policing the police and my perspective on that. As the chairman of the board for the Cocoa Police Department Citizen Advisory Committee, I have the opportunity to review every closed complaint against a police officer for Cocoa Police Department. And so since I was nominated as chair, and I have in the last 2 years, because I think we started in 2021, in part thanks to the advocacy on behalf of the city by Reverend Johnny Dennis, who I believe is in this chat. He was one of the gentlemen that really advocated to start an advisory committee here in the city of Cocoa. But I was nominated the first chair, and I've been nominated each year since. And so I am currently still presiding as the chairman of the board. And it's interesting, just the shift since we had a new chief of police take over. And I'll just kind of talk to Cocoa and what I've seen as chairman of the board for this committee, that our job is to police the police. Our job is to review these complaints and to make recommendations to the police department and their leadership about what they can do differently and what they can do better. And what I saw when I first began was typical. I saw officers doing different things, and I saw lack of punishment and under punishment. And many times I suggested greater punishment or alternative sanctions, and inquired about those things. And the shift over the last couple of years, since we have a new chief and new leadership, has been Cocoa Police Department going a step further in policing themselves. I've actually seen several complaints where our chief, Chief Collier, he initiated complaints against his own officers, and opened up internal affairs investigations against his own underlings. And because of that, he's received a lot of backlash in Brevard County. There are a lot of people that have wanted to get rid of him, and I've seen a lot put out there about him. And I'm not here to lobby on behalf of him. One of the first things I told him when he got into office was that I'm with you when you're right, and I will support you. But when you're wrong, I will hold you accountable, and I will speak out. And in fact, after his first year of service as chief, the Florida Today came to me and they asked me, what would you grade him if you had an opportunity to do so? And I told them a C+. And when he saw me in person, he had a couple words to say about that, but I told him I mean what I say, and I say what I mean when it relates to that. And I gave reasons why, and you can look that up in the Florida Today. It's verifiable. But again, we've had the opportunity to witness some very heinous things in the very beginning. I'll tell you, in my first year as chairman of the board for Cocoa Police Advisory Committee, I saw this, and I'll give you a brief description of the facts. There's a young man that was stopped for a minor traffic infraction. And there was a very experienced officer that was the lead officer for the stop. And then there was a young rookie officer that was backing him up. And the older, more experienced officer might have had some prior dealings with this young man, not quite sure about that. But he seemed to be very sure that this young man had drugs on his person. Even though he didn't have any right or probable cause to search this young man, he proceeded to search this young man and pat him down for drugs. He didn't find any. And so he unzipped this young man's pants, reached into his underwear, pulled up his testicles, and searched under this man's testicles and under his penis, between his penis and testicles. Those are the type of things that we were seeing. I see the shocked looks on some of your faces. Those are some of the types of complaints that we were seeing when I first started on the committee for the Cocoa Police Advisory Committee. And I apologize if it's vulgar or a bit graphic, but I want to be as honest and open with you as possible about what we've seen and about the shifts that we see when we police the police, because that's really important. Since we put a chief in position that polices his own and that holds them accountable when they do things like this, we've seen a steep decline in things like this. I believe that the worst complaint that I've seen is one that I just read last week, that we just covered last week. And you might have seen this, it made the news, but there was an officer who was under the influence, and he began firing rounds, and he got into a shootout with BCSO officers. This one made the news, but this was actually when that officer was off duty. But as a result of this, he was both arrested and fired by Cocoa PD. But that's the worst that I've seen under the new chief, whereas under the old chief, the story that I described before were a set of facts that I had to mull over. And the officer was suspended pending investigation, and I believe that he quit. But I was told by Chief Cantaloupe in full transparency that the plan was to fire him after that investigation had been completed, but he was not immediately fired. They opened the investigation, even though all of the things that he did were on video to that young man. And in other news, because of his attorney dropping the ball, that young man wasn't able to file a suit against Cocoa PD and seek any sort of recovery for what they did. And so it's horrible, some of the things that we used to see. And that's why it's really important to police the police and to put police officials in place that are okay with policing their own, because the thin blue line is one of the greatest dangers to citizens as it relates to this topic. Because many officers, unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons, some of those reasons, good reasons, and some of those reasons, bad reasons, but a lot of officers will not police their own. I had an opportunity to sit in a meeting a few months ago, and a very candid conversation took place, and an officer gave his perspective as to why some officers don't police their own in certain situations, because he shared a scenario that had happened while he was on duty and something that he saw, and he didn't participate in the wrongdoing, but he also didn't intervene or stop it. And I asked why, and I told him that it's wrong that this happened and you should have done more. And his response was this, and it gave me some perspective that really made me think. He said, had I intervened and stopped that officer, then let's say a week later, there's a shootout. I'm pinned down and surrounded by enemies, by criminals that are shooting at me, and I call for backup. There have been many scenarios where an officer pissed the wrong officer off and that backup never came, or that backup was delayed, and as a result, they died in the line of duty. And so the inverse, the other side of this is that, unfortunately, when we don't police the police and when we don't put people in position to kind of tear down those structures that protect and that bolster that thin blue line, then we get scenarios where officers are afraid to police their own because they're concerned that if they call for backup and they need help, that other people might not show up because of that level of toxicity that we see in some departments. And it's an unfortunate thing. I've also had the opportunity to run for sheriff. In policing the police, I thought that it would, what greater way to put someone in charge and to change the leadership structure at Brevard County Sheriff's Office than to change sheriffs. And so I made my best attempt to do so back in 2020 when I ran for Brevard County Sheriff. And while I didn't win, I'm so grateful for some of the things that we saw as a result. We did see Attorney Travis advocate on behalf of Florida Today to get the Gregory Edwards tape released. Unfortunately, Sheriff Ivey's attorneys were able to delay the release until after the election results had already been announced. And so, you know, that was something that, you know, may have made a difference. We don't know, but, you know, in the county we're in, it's a difficult race to win either way. We were outspent about $220,000 to about $150,000. And during that race, I received death threats. I had people following me, taking pictures of me, all sorts of interesting things. But while that might be discouraging for some, if we want to police the police, going into law enforcement, putting good people in law enforcement and running for offices that have the ability to police the police is important. Running for county commissioner, because the county commissioners are the ones that set the budget for law enforcement or for BCSO in the county, is really important. Having people on county commissioner, on the county commission that are handpicked by the sheriff and endorsed by the sheriff, who are supposed to hold the sheriff accountable, is a problem. And a problem that unfortunately many of Brevard don't see as a problem and won't see as a problem until we are run by a totalitarian government and our sheriff basically taking over emergency management and other municipalities, which is one of the things that he's offered to do, is take over police agency municipalities in order to save cities money. And so if City of Cocoa is having some issues, our sheriff will make an offer for the City of Cocoa to pay the sheriff's office to police the City of Cocoa and disband their own police agency so that BCSO can take over instead. This is an offer that has been made to different cities in Brevard County, and something that apparently the citizens of Brevard County don't have much of an issue with. And so I really don't have a lot else to say. I'm open to questions, but I will give you just a very brief and succinct action step. Volunteer. One word, volunteer. And many of you already do that, but if you are especially concerned with matters involving law enforcement and policing the police, being on a citizen advisory committee, all it took was a conversation with a city councilman and filling out an application. That's all it took, those two things, for me to end up on this advisory committee, which I've been doing for 3 years and have had the opportunity to be intimately involved in policing the police. Showing up to our meetings is important. Attorney Travis has been to several meetings to advocate as it relates to several different issues that involve policing the police. And that is really important. At our last meeting, we had a grand total of 2 members of the public that were not city councilmen or law enforcement agents or members of the committee that showed up to our meeting. 2 people from the public were concerned about policing the police in the city of Cocoa. And part of that is on the city of Cocoa, and this issue has been raised several times, in that they do not market what we do and do not advertise to alert people very well of what's happening. It's put on the website, and in order to find it, you have to click this link, that link, and this link to be specifically looking for it, as opposed to putting it on the home screen or somewhere where it would be more readily accessible, or putting a sign or a note up in the Jolie Smith Center and a few of the community centers in the city of Cocoa, which is something that they could do and don't. putting a sign somewhere in the city, at the city office, where members of the public that are coming in to pay their light bill or not light bill, but coming in to pay their water bill or coming in to address other city matters, where they could actually see it. You know, just simple things like that. But again, I'm going off on a tangent, and I don't want to do that. I'll answer questions when you're ready for them. But please volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Alton Edmond.
Thank you, Alton. We really appreciate it, and we have appreciated your involvement in our programs over the years, and your service to our community. You really are a community hero. Thank you for that. So your key action item is to volunteer and get involved in your community and try to make something. Be involved. Don't sit back and just throw stuff at the television, because that gets you nowhere, right? Anyway, thank you very much, Alton. We appreciate that. And our next speaker is Quinn Diaz. Quinn is the Strategy and Special Projects Associate with the ACL of Florida. He has been working over in Tampa with our Citizens Review Board. And I'm going to just hand the floor right over to you, Quinn. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Phil. Okay, yes, my name is Quinn Diaz. My pronouns are they, them, and I just wanted to quickly recognize two of my colleagues on the call, Dr. Joyce Hamilton, who will be speaking after me, and then N.R. Hines, who serves as the policy strategist for our organization's criminal justice reform campaign. So thank you both for being here tonight. My name is Quinn. I have worked at the ACLU of Florida since September 2022, so not quite a year. I now live in Brevard County. We recently bought the old witch's house in Indy Atlantic. If you know the history, it's quite interesting. But yeah, so I am the Special Projects and Strategist Associate for the ACLU of Florida. Joyce and I pretty much run the police reform initiatives for the organization, but just a quick background on the ACLU. If you're not familiar, we are one of the nation's leading and largest civil rights organizations. We engage in litigation, community empowerment, legislative advocacy, and outreach. And we defend the Bill of Rights. So we're nonpartisan, but you know, you can imagine how that goes in Florida currently. So today I'm going to speak briefly about our efforts in Tampa, as Phil mentioned, to equip the Citizens Review Board there, which is similar to what Alton serves on in Cocoa. So, you know, we're working, these boards, they exist in many municipalities across the state. Our work in Tampa, I'll speak in detail more later, but it was to equip it with more legal tools so that it could be more effective at its job. I'll speak to that. I'll speak to our new project, which is really exciting. And it's a collaboration project with the National Association of Social Workers, the Florida chapter. And we're trying to expand the use of police social worker co-response programs throughout the state. I'll speak to that, and then I'll just generally speak up to a little bit of the other stuff that Joyce and I are working on. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention today is June 1st, the first day of Pride Month. And for those of you who might not be familiar, Pride is LGBTQ History Month, and it all started because it was a response to police brutality and unjust persecution. At the time, there were all these laws about what clothing genders should wear, what type of things were acceptable in public. And so police would essentially just raid these establishments that were popular for LGBTQ individuals to patronize and, you know, be brutalizing them and unjustly arresting them and all these terrible things. So that's what Pride's all about. So I just wanted to wish happy Pride to everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. As Alton expressed and our first speaker, Jessica, you know, getting involved in the community is very important, and volunteering especially, Alton's call to action. So I'm glad that you all are here with us tonight, engage with the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, an awesome organization. And I'm glad that they represent me too, now that I'm a Brevard resident. So now into what we do. The ACLU, I mentioned a little bit about our work. It kind of focuses on litigation, legislative advocacy, community outreach, and empowerment. our organization is, of course, committed to racial justice. And we do understand the harms that Black and Brown communities specifically and historically have suffered and continue to suffer as a result of the discriminatory and violent nature of policing. There's a lot of literature about the history of policing in America, and it has direct ties to slavery, of course. And so I will share at the end a reading list that I encourage everyone to take a look at, to pick up your next book from, because there's just so much, especially like Black author literature about these topics that we could all, benefit from reading more about. Anyway, back to our focus as an organization on police reform. The way that we kind of organize things currently is that we have 3 primary campaigns. One is criminal justice reform that NR heads, as I mentioned earlier. Then we have immigrant rights and voting rights. And so police reform, it does fall under the criminal justice reform work, but it also kind of takes up other space as well. And so here our focus is kind of on what's called divestment from policing, which in broad terms just kind of means like reimagining the systems of police to reduce the role of police in their communities, to increase oversight and accountability of those law enforcement organizations, and to reinvest in our communities in a meaningful way so that folks who might normally have entanglements with the police because of systemic structural issues are actually getting the resources and the assistance that they need in other avenues of government assistance or advocacy and intervention. And so ideas and opportunities for police reform across the state, because that's what we're focused on as a statewide org, they're as varied as the communities we live in. And one of the tenets of our approach to organizing and just working with communities is that we don't, as Joyce likes to say, parachute in to places. We don't show up, do what we want to do, and then leave. We really try and just follow the community's lead. And especially on issues of policing, we try and follow the lead of the Black and the Brown-led organizations that are doing the work in these communities. These are the experts. These are the folks that, as you'll hear later in my call to action, I'm going to urge you to get in touch with and to learn more about. But again, these ideas for reform, they can take any type, pretty much if you can dream it, you can see it. So some things that we've done in the past are advocacy aimed at municipal budgets. So I was really, disappointed to hear that here in Brevard, there's no information publicly available about Sheriff Ivey's police budget. And so I'm thinking that if we follow Jessica's call to action about requesting some, doing some FOIA requests, maybe we should all request some information about the budget here. Because then we can advocate around it. We can be like, hey, why are we spending all this money on these sorts of things? Like, the need is not great. We're militarizing our police for what reason in Brevard? All these sorts of important questions to ask. We can also focus on legislation that narrows the role and responsibilities of police. Ballot measures that alter the city's municipal charter to provide increased oversight and accountability, which I will soon speak to. Or executive orders that shift police resources, which of course will be hard to come by in this political climate. But we can also, of course, support electoral campaigns that support officials committed to this type of divestment work and community reinvestment work. But again, if you can see it, you can dream it. And I'll share a police reform toolkit later on that kind of just shows you the steps for getting involved in your local police reform fight, things to think about, and all that good stuff. So again, I mentioned we work to follow the lead of Black-led organizations. We are committed to transformational shifts in power, funding, and resources, which is what a lot of the movements since the murder of George Floyd in May 2020 have called for, of course, led by Black Lives Matter. It's an important movement to follow. And again, we're trying to just shift the responsibility away from punitive and harmful responses to community needs, and fund more community-based, community-led support services. So now those are kind of our overarching goals at the ACLU of Florida for police reform, the work that Joyce and I do together. And so I'll speak a little bit about our work in Tampa. And so again, I mentioned that we do statewide work. We kind of just follow the data. We see where, maybe policing is extra harmful. Using the publicly available data, we have specific data strategists on our team, and they're fantastic at being like, hey, you got to check out Tampa. You know, there's some weird discrepancies happening here. Like, let's look into it a little bit more. And then, you know, we are a large organization, so we have about 50 members of staff. And so we're able then to utilize our field team and our communications team to try and make like more concentrated impacts in these locations. And so in Tampa, what we saw, and Joyce has been involved in this work in Tampa. Joyce is a Tampa resident and basically has been calling for more civilian oversight of police and just general police transparency and accountability since 2015, when the Tampa Bay Times ran this fantastic article. I'll find it and I'll share it before the end. But it's basically about how the police there were just writing at a discriminatory rate all of these violations for bicycling infractions, because the folks that they were finding on bicycles were Black and brown people. And so there were, you know, fines and fees is the way to tie people down. And that type of entanglement with the legal system can really upend your life and, you know, have you like tied to it for much longer than, you know, oh, I rode my bicycle through a stop sign type of thing really should entail. Anyway, Joyce is involved in the bicycling while Black investigation. And one of the things that came out of that was, hey, you know, we should really have some civilian oversight of the police. And so that conversation started in 2015, and it really gained momentum again after George Floyd's murder in 2020, when the city council bought into the idea, which is an important aspect of, you know, achieving any type of reform measure, is that you need, to a certain extent, the buy-in of your stakeholders. And so because this was a measure that was going to have to go through city council, it was necessary at some point for them to, you know, buy in a little bit. And so Tampa is a little bit more blue than Brevard. And so we were starting off in a good point. But, you know, the conversation had stalled. And by the time it was renewed in, you know, June 2020, that summer, what it looked like was giving this board that had been started reluctantly by the mayor at the time, who was a former chief of police, giving it more tools to do its job. And so basically, you know, civilian oversight, what does that mean? Well, as Alton mentioned, you apply for the role and then you're on this board that meets regularly. And in Tampa, at least, what you do is you investigate issues of police misconduct, abuse of power, ethics violations, those types of things. And every type of community has their own approach to it. And so in Tampa, the way it works is that they could only investigate issues that were closed. So no ongoing cases, and the like sanctions that the civilian board could impose on the whoever was being investigated didn't exist. No sanctions. It was pretty much like, there's a finding of misconduct here, and we will refer the matter back to the police department for further investigation and to do with it what they see fit. And so we're like, well, you know, that's not great, but maybe we can like make it a little stronger. And so the goal was to give the civilian board access to an independent attorney and subpoena power, so that they could just have a little bit more control over, you know, the types of cases they're investigating, what types of evidence they're able to access for their investigations. And then the thing with the independent attorney is that at the time, the city of Tampa and the police department and the civilian review board were all kind of sharing an attorney, and that's a conflict of interest because you can't have one party who's investigating the other have the same type of legal counsel. So what we found was that the civilian review board, they were actually getting wrong guidance from the city's attorney. Because of course, you know, if you can minimize the liability that the city might face as a result of police misconduct, that's probably in your best interest. And so the civilian review board there didn't really realize the extent of their power, what was permissible, what was not, and any type of, you know, basically they were just being pulled along in the dark. And so we said, well, one of the first steps to, you know, righting that wrong is to give them independent counsel. And so this was a protracted fight. And again, I mentioned it started in 2015. Well, when I joined the team in September 2022, we were at the point where it looked like this measure was going to be basically a amendment to the city charter, which then would require in Tampa for it to go before the voters. So it had become a ballot initiative. And during the municipal election in the first week of March, it was supposed to be on the ballot. And so we were like, oh, great, it's going good for us. We had to, unfortunately, and again, this is a dramatic long story. We had to cut the subpoena power. That was not going to be politically feasible. So we're like, all right, we're just going to go for the independent attorney. We'll get it on the ballot. We'll educate folks. Everyone's going to be in support of this. It's like a no-brainer. Well, it turns out that politically it wasn't suitable for the new mayor, who is also a former chief of police. And so she kind of quashed it like at the last minute. And so it goes from being a ballot initiative to then being this thing that we have to reintroduce at the city council level as an ordinance and have it pass through the city council. And we really didn't think it was going to happen because the mayor had vetoed it, even though we had passed it initially to be on the ballot. So we're like, well, it's going to come to her again. Why? There's nothing changed with it. She's probably going to veto it. But to our surprise, last month in April, she signed off on it. So now the Citizens Review Board in Tampa does have access to an independent attorney effective immediately. And so our role has now shifted from trying to, institute that to now monitoring how that's going. And so that's of course, a really important part to advocacy is you champion these initiatives, but the job's not done once they're, implemented. You really have to make sure that they're being followed, that, if there's questions about how that process is being held, that it's being investigated, that it's being improved, that, you're not just settling for, okay, great, now we have an independent attorney. It's like, yeah, now let's get that subpoena power. Or as Elton had mentioned, the lack of punishment, like let's be able to get some real power. And I love that Elton had mentioned that the police chief in Cocoa has taken to upholding his officers to a higher standard, because leadership absolutely starts in your own department. And so, well, another thing that we can do is we can always support candidates for sheriff who have these types of, community support goals in mind in how they're going to run their departments. So that was our Tampa CRB. I'm going to quickly move to our current work, which is with the National Association of Social Workers. This is a project I'm really excited about. So I'm sure we all unfortunately saw what happened to Jordan Neely last month in New York on the subway. This is a person who was experiencing homelessness, who had mental health issues, and who was just murdered in broad daylight. And the police weren't involved in this instance, but it really highlights, the issues that we have in our communities with mental health and how we see folks who are suffering from mental health crises. The police aren't always the best people to respond to someone who's having a mental health crisis. Suicide by cop is a thing. There's all these different types of, micro incidents that can happen when police are responding to a person who really needs help, but maybe isn't able to communicate in a way that suits how the police want to be communicated with. So what a lot of jurisdictions nationwide have been doing for the past 20 years, this is nothing new, it's called the co-response program. And what it does, and there's various models, I'll speak briefly on the different types of models, but essentially it's social workers either responding alongside police officers to police 911 calls for assistance that involved either a substance use, a mental health issue, or any other type of crisis. I'll speak later about how some programs are approaching it, but there's a variety of calls, 911 calls that can be appropriate for this type of response. And what essentially happens is that these super trained social workers respond and work to de-escalate the situation. They intervene in these crises. They're of course very well trained, and they do have the officers there just in case things do escalate or get violent. But the idea is harm reduction. And this is something that I have worked on throughout my career. But the idea is that you don't want to do more harm to a situation. You want to meet the person where they're at and try to usher them into help as they're ready to receive it. And so this is kind of the idea of this co-response type of program. And so in the chat real quick, I'm going to drop this map I made. This is a Google map, and you can see where in Florida these co-response programs currently exist. And so our goal in working with the National Association of Social Workers is to expand their availability. And you'll see on this map, the ones marked in pink represent one type of model, and the purple ones a different. The purple ones are kind of the more, I don't know, maybe a more, despite the frequency on the map, it's more of a prevailing police embedded type of model where either the social worker is actually riding along in the police car to respond to these 911 situations. No map is up. Okay. I was supposed to, I tried to send a link, but I can also I'll just share my screen. Okay, let's share. Okay, so I've got my screen up so we can see we've got all of these dots. The purple ones are where police are embedded in, or excuse me, social workers are embedded in these response programs. The pink are ones that are led by healthcare institutions. And so, you know, it's a different approach. For the police programs, I'll speak to those briefly. I'm going to stop my share. So for the police programs, one of the leading models in Florida is located in St. Pete. It is called the CALL program, C-A-L-L. And this serves as a model basically because in St. Pete, what they've done is they've expanded the net of type of like 911 calls that are referred to the social work program. And so basically,
When you have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, so they do truancy, they do substance use, they do even like petty theft. They'll send social workers in lieu of officers to be like, hey, did you engage in this type of behavior because maybe you're hungry or maybe you need a place to sleep tonight, or you know, whatever you might need. Let's figure out a way for you to get what you need and a way to avoid entanglement in the criminal justice system, which, you know, is not going to suit you because you're already, you know, you're having a hard experience and you don't need police entanglement. You need like someone who's listening to you and someone who's kind of being like a friend. And so that's what, of course, you know, everyone's paid here. But the idea is that we're doing harm reduction. We're not making people's lives more difficult because they have like a substance use issue or they don't have a place to sleep. So the motivations for the starts of these types of programs, they're usually either proactive or reactive. In the case of St. Pete, it was proactive. They said, this saves us money. This is a better use of our resources. Our police officers should not be responding to all of these calls all day. They should be focusing on the more serious calls, and we can deploy our social worker team to these lower level calls. Reactive, in the case of Hillsborough County, they also have a program now, and there's a result of a tragedy that happened. And that is kind of how we find ourselves. So basically, we're working with the National Association of Social Workers to create a blueprint for implementation that jurisdictions can use to start up these programs if they want. And of course, I would hate to end this call without mentioning that Brevard Cares, based in Brevard, does run a mobile response team. They primarily focus on children and families. And I'm not entirely sure the breadth of the calls that they respond to. In addition to this work, generally we monitor legislation, we follow the data, we try and do community engagement. I'm going to share a police reform toolkit that we've recently made that, you know, shows you how to get involved if you're interested. And one last thing I'll mention is that an NR, you know, is more of a specialist in this than I am, but in terms of monitoring legislation, there was a bill that kind of made some movement this session. Luckily, it did not pass, but it would make the act of civilians videotaping police officers a crime. And so, of course, that is, you know, witness intimidation. How can that be a crime? Well, it's important to get involved. And let me, Bonnie, I'll proceed to my my action items, my 3 action items, because I can't do just one. So my first one, as I mentioned, is it is critical to understand what challenges your community is facing and where, if you want to get involved and you know, pursue police reform initiatives. So my first action item is to learn about what the Black and Brown led organizations that are based in your communities are doing. They're the experts. How can you get involved? Let's volunteer. The other thing I'm just going to plug real quick, Joyce is going to speak to it shortly after me, is to share information about our grant program. And then lastly, I implore you, if you see injustice happening in real time, do what you can safely to be an active ally and not a passive bystander. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Quinn. And I'll tell you what, everybody that's here tonight probably would be standing and giving you and Alton and Jessica a standing ovation. It's one of the rather disappointing things about not having a live audience is to get that direct feedback. But I can guarantee you that we are all giving you a round of applause and saying thank you. Thank you to Alton and to Jessica for excellent presentations, which frankly raise a lot of questions. And I would remind everybody that we will be taking questions here momentarily. So if you've got a question, kind of think about it. And I'm glad we got those action items. You had 3 of them. And so you said, learn about Black and Brown communities and their activities, their grant program that the ACLU operates, and then don't be a passive bystander. And we all saw how critically important in the George Floyd case that people were with their cameras standing there capturing from different angles. People were saying, hey, wait a second, what you're doing is wrong. Don't you understand that? And the officers were pushing back. But the fact that they were like the conscience of the community standing on those officers' shoulders at that moment. And
I will just mention, Phil,
Yes.
that the young woman who at the time was a minor, who filmed that murder, she actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts. So, that kind of just flies in the face of, in Florida here, we're trying to criminalize that. Like, that's Nobel Peace Prize worthy. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And again, as you said, we should recognize our VIP guest speaker this evening, Dr. Joyce Hamilton. She's a senior strategy and special projects advisor for the ACLU of Florida. Again, a longtime friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. And we want to recognize you and invite you to, you got a few minutes to kind of introduce yourself and to let us know what you're thinking. Joyce, if you could take the floor.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. And I'm so glad to see some very familiar faces and friends and new hopeful friends and allies in the work of police reform. Queen already shared with you the things that we are doing at the ACLU of Florida. We among the things that we focus on, we have 3 campaigns, primary campaigns, and they are voting rights, immigrant rights, and criminal justice reform. And at the time when George Floyd was murdered, we recognized that we did not then have the bandwidth to take this on full on, but wanted to help address that problem. And so one of the things that we did was we created what we call Partners in Freedom Fund. And what that is that we provide funding to local organizations to do police reform at the local level. And what I want to tell you, and this is something that we just launched for this, we launched it in 2020, and we are now having a call for proposals for funding from $5,000 to $10,000. And the deadline is August 31st. And I wanted to let you all know about that tonight, because if you see an opportunity to address police reform, in Brevard, in any of the city at the local level in Brevard, and of an organization. And when we created this fund, we really wanted to support the work that grassroots organizations are doing and Black and Brown led organizations are doing. So if you know of any organization and you know of an issue that you think you need some support to help make happen, please apply for this fund, but most importantly, help us get the word out that this funding is available. You've heard from all the speakers about the issues and the problems, and Quinn also mentioned some of the things that we are focusing on in terms of monitoring the police and police actions and behaviors. You also heard about body cameras and how important that is. Not only you having a camera and seeing what's going on, but body cameras in terms of transparency. And what is important to mention, and that was evident in the presentation with regards to the racial disparity of increased, disproportionate number of folks of color and minor and low income individuals who are caught up in this net, who are over policed, and communities that are over policed. So we are talking about bias-free training, for police officers. We're talking about accountability, and also addressing excessive use of force. And so I'm going to stop there, but we do have the funding available. Please encourage anyone to apply. If you know of any local group that's interested, in Brevard, and see a path to some success with a positive outcome in terms of accountability, transparency, do apply for this grant. And we will always be a resource to you and your community, and glad to be here and glad that you've taken on this issue because it's too important not to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamilton. And by the way, it really is cool that you got that PhD. I think that's really wonderful. And Dr. Hamilton has actually really been a positive influence in the state, across our state, but in our community as well. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but I would encourage all of our viewers to consider joining the ACLU. It is a worthy organization, both locally, statewide, and nationally in many ways. We have a wonderful local ACLU organization, and we often call on them to help the Space Coast Progressive Alliance in our efforts, and often to speak on our panels. And it's really, really wonderful to be able to get statewide representatives here as well. So it's really neat.
If I could add, Phil,
Yes, sure.
not only become a member, but if you're interested in volunteering with the ACLU, you could do so by going to our website.
And the website is?
www.aclufl.org.
Excellent.
We'll put that in the chat as well.
And indeed, those that are here at the Zoom can look in the chat. There's a lot of information that's loaded in there. Nice stuff to have. You can take a picture of that if you want to pay attention to the program. You could take a quick picture and have that as a reference for later. We always get lots of information, and sometimes it comes at us fast and it's hard to capture it. But taking a quick picture of the screen is kind of neat, or a screen grab if you're on an iPhone or an iPad kind of thing. We're going to be opening the floor to questions. And so I'm going to ask anybody on the floor or anybody that's involved here to go to reactions. And when you go to reactions on your device, you can raise your hand and that'll allow us to recognize you. I'm going to take a point of privilege since I'm here blabbing right in your ear at this moment as people start lining up to ask their questions, to ask each of you, all three of you, all four of you, what's your interpretation of this bizarre circumstance where our county sheriff believes that he is a constitutional sheriff? In his phrase, it's a bizarre term. I know it started with a guy out in Arizona, and many sheriffs and police officers are tuning into this idea that somehow within a county that they are the highest authority in their community, higher than federal law enforcement, higher than state law enforcement. They are literally the county sheriff, and they're the final authority. And this seems to be quite unconstitutional. They're calling themselves constitutional sheriffs. I know that some of that goes back to language that was used during the American Civil War. It's been struck down numerous times by the Supreme Court. How in this day and age can any law enforcement officer pretend that they are a quote unquote constitutional sheriff, the highest authority? It just seems bizarre, and it seems quite unconstitutional. Joyce, I don't know if you would like to pick that up, or if anybody else on our panel would like to pick that up. Oh, Joyce, you're muted.
I'm going to defer to the attorneys to speak to that, but I'm also going to invite my colleague, Nisha Rose, to join in responding, if you don't mind. She's our
please, absolutely.
They're our policy strategist.
Jessica Alton, do you have any thoughts on that issue, the constitutional sheriff thing?
I mean, whenever obviously we hear that, we kind of giggle. I mean, I've never heard of that phrase in any fashion as related to the law, case law, legal authority, anything like that. Have you, Elton? Yeah, no, he's shaking his head no. So no, we've never been in court. I don't know if that's why the local guy thinks that he has absolute immunity. He didn't use the phrase constitutional sheriff in claiming absolute immunity when he filed a motion to dismiss the Wheel case. But I've never read any authority, case law, or anything that has anything to do with a constitutional sheriff. So, I mean, to me, it's a propaganda gimmick.
Quinn,
Very, very strange. Yes, go ahead, Alton.
I was giving Quinn an opportunity.
I was just gonna say, Alton, thank you. Agree with what Jessica said. It is a tool of propaganda. And I think where the constitutional sheriff thing stems from is the right's new obsession with constitutional carry, which is how they define their Second Amendment access, in that like the Constitution grants them like ungovernable access to firearms. And so I think that's where this whole constitutional element comes from. But I will just say that historically, we know that the concentration of power in dangerous hands has never worked out well.
Indeed. I know, is anybody else here on the panel that would like to address that?
So I agree with Attorney Travis in that there is no legal precedent for this, and for Ivy calling himself that, and some of the other sheriffs doing that as well. And while it seems laughable and downright ridiculous to hear it, it's not surprising to me. Because again, I tell you about him setting up or wanting to set up a totalitarian government with himself at the top here in Brevard County. But I mean, I want you to just sit down and think for a moment about the moves that he's made. He has endorsed candidates for the county commissioners that are in charge of holding him accountable. And so the people that create the funding and that draw the legislation that restricts his movement or that restricts his ability are mostly people that he put in position. The judges who are the other side of this balancing, because again, when we talk about separation of powers, you have these three branches that are supposed to keep each other accountable, right? And so you have the legislative branch that he's put into place, and then the judicial branch, he is endorsing judges in their races as well. And I recently endorsed a judge that ran for office in the 2022 election, and I'm grateful that she won. But there were several judges that were endorsed by our sheriff who were elected and that have been elected. And so when we have Attorney Travis that is fighting to get the sheriff to turn over records, that the county commissioner has made legislation to make those records harder to access, and then a judge has to make a decision as to whether or not the sheriff should have to turn over those records, and the sheriff is putting the judge in place as well, we have a problem. Because the people that control the purse strings and the people that interpret the law are in the pockets of one man. And then we have the public defender who's endorsed and friends with the sheriff. And we have the state attorney who's endorsed and friends with the sheriff. And so whether indigent people can receive access to effective legal counsel, and the person that's in charge of ensuring that they receive that access is endorsed by the sheriff, and that person who is often supposed to be opposite the sheriff endorsed the sheriff when I ran against the sheriff, that's another issue. And then the state attorney, who is supposed to independently review cases to determine whether or not to file charges, when they're in the pocket of the sheriff, that's another issue altogether. So for him to believe that he is the end all be all is reasonable in a county where we've allowed him to be that.
Yeah.
Because it is true that in many ways he is the end all be all, because he controls, and now he controls the school board as well. And so you name it, even local offices. When city councilmen run for office for the city of Cocoa, he has endorsed people in races. He endorsed the current mayor that we have in the city of Cocoa was endorsed by the sheriff. The current mayor for the city of Palm Bay was endorsed by the sheriff. I believe that the current mayor for Melbourne might have been endorsed by the sheriff as well, but I don't want to misspeak. But I know for sure the current mayor for Cocoa and the current mayor for Palm Bay were both endorsed by the sheriff.
It's a difficult situation,
Yeah.
and it's bizarre. It is Twilight Zone, and it just strikes me that it seems unconstitutional, frankly.
Yeah, I am on my third judge on the wheel case. Because they all have pictures all over the place of themselves bunnying up with the sheriff. Now, third one, I filed a motion to recuse. He hasn't recused himself yet. That one might be more of a battle. But that's what we're talking about. How can someone who's been wrongfully put on the wheel of fugitive get a fair trial in Brevard County? I can't even get a hearing on my motion for change of venue because I can't find a judge. It's not related. So that said, I want to commend Alton for his campaign. And, you know, the longer I'm in Brevard, the more I almost think people need to start running, even if it's to lose. And I say that because even if you run and lose, I think Alton's campaign taught us this, it moved the needle. So often in this county, good people talk themselves out of running because it is a lot of money. Unfortunately, it's a lot of money. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to win because it's blah, blah, blah. But if you get conversation out there, then these people do have to answer these hard questions and it might move the needle. And yeah, we've got some campaigns coming up that we need to talk about, some elections.
Excellent. We have a whole line of people with questions, people that have been patiently waiting with their hands up. And Anthony, I'm sorry to make you wait so long. Anthony.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. Thank you. First, I just want to thank Quinn, Alton, Jessica, Joyce, everybody that spoke. If I missed you, wonderful. I have all my kids running around, so it's like a battle in itself trying to stay focused here. But thank you. Just thank you for doing this. And some of the things that I've been writing down on my paper here as all the speakers talk, I just kind of it jumbles around in my head and I try to get it down. But, you know, how can we teach this questions to everybody? How can we teach or show how to be good trouble when it comes to keeping police accountable and to stay safe as well? Because I do see people, you know, on YouTube, on social media, who more often than not catch themselves in a bit of trouble while trying to be good trouble in keeping the police accountable, because they do tend to overstep that boundary. The police do tend to try to find something because they don't want to be recorded, right? We know this. This is not new. The other things that I'm kind of tossing up in my brain here is the change of the mentality during trainings for the police officers. What is the why is it in the military we have more de-escalation practices in the military than we do with our local police forces? These are questions that I have. And why is in the military they're so good at de-escalating in super stressful situations? Some far more stressful than the simple things people are getting beaten over every day in America. And so those are the things that I would have good. What are the culture of the training that happens for the police? And is that culture set so far back that that's the damage? And we need to change that culture now, moving forward, in training them and having the right training to help with this and to move in a better direction. So we know that our Black and brown communities are affected the most, okay, when it comes to this. And it's, I'm kind of a big mouth. I've experienced myself some mouthing off to the law enforcement in trying to protect those that are being harassed. And I've been in that situation. And I'm proud to say that I've been in that situation, and I'll continue to do it. But let's focus on how maybe we can change the cog in the wheel in that training. And is that the way to go? I don't know the answers, but
well, Anthony, you know what, your questions are outstanding, and I think you've asked enough questions to take an entire program in itself.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to get it all out there.
And I wonder who on our panel would like to pick up and answer some of these things. We have a whole line of people with their hands raised, so we're going to run out of time if we take too much time. And I'm going to ask people to please limit your questions to 3 minutes so that we can get all these questions in. Who would like to pick up some of Anthony's questions or his observations?
Go ahead, Jessica.
The only thing that I will say, and I'll keep it short, is I try to focus on the fight in front of me so I don't get overwhelmed. It's so easy to do. And I try to focus on Brevard. There's so many other things going on. How do we focus on Brevard? I don't know, other than doing meetings like this. I honestly have kicked around the idea of forming a nonprofit. And if anyone has done that kind of thing before, let's talk. And that's all I got.
And as for me, I heard one question that I want to answer to, and it was, how do we teach people how to cause good trouble and be safe? And the best way to do that is to exemplify it. I have, and I'll use myself as an example. I have been a part of protests all around Brevard County. On multiple occasions, and as a Black man protesting different issues, some involving law enforcement and things like that, I'm thankful I've never had to be arrested or anything like that, because there were just certain things that I wanted to do and made sure that I did so that I avoided confrontation, because obviously, and one of the things that I teach people is that you can fight law enforcement actions in court, but on the street, when they have a gun and a vest and a taser and a bunch of other tools on their belt, and you're practically defenseless, that's not the place for you to fight them. And so to exemplify that and to exercise safe behaviors yourself is a great way to show others. And so when we put together the justice demonstration in response to George Floyd's murder here, the largest demonstration of its type in Brevard County, we were very adamant, and I sent a lot of messages myself to the different people that were participating. We're very adamant about it being a nonviolent protest, and about the way that we would conduct ourselves. And thankfully, we had an estimated 50,000 plus people show up to participate in that protest, and we only had one arrest. And we had no property damage, no looting, and actually the businesses along the route of our protest benefited from the protest, because that Wawa, the Dollar General, and the CVS received an influx of business as a result. And so you got to be the change that you want to see in the world.
I just wanted to add that the ACLU have done over the years, know your rights if stopped by the police. And that's something that we will certainly love to collaborate with you in some way to do, because you have to know what you can or can. We all know in certain ways what you can or cannot do, but it's important to know that. Also, the rights of protesters. We have information also on our website about the rights of protesters, so we could do that because the legislature is always changing, making it harder for people to exercise their First Amendment rights. Quinn mentioned the toolkit for those who wanted to they see a problem at the local level that they want to address, and the toolkit provides some guidance about how to go about advocating for local policy changes as well. So I just want to put those things out there.
Absolutely. That you have a wonderful card. At least you used to have a card that was the Know Your Rights card, and a very simple step-by-step checklist essentially on what you can and can't do and what's legal. And of course, the skills of de-escalation should be taught to every law enforcement person. And you as a citizen, all of us as citizens, should know a little of those skills as well, a way to step down a potential conflict so that it doesn't become violent, it doesn't become a threat. And that's, if a cop can't de-escalate the setting, perhaps you can de-escalate it yourself. We have another hand up here, and that is Darlene. You've got the floor.
Okay, I have a question about the quality of our police officers. What exactly qualifies and what are the standards to apply for the job to be a police officer? And would that make for a better police department if they followed those guidelines?
Who would like to pick that one up? Alton?
I'm gonna, oh,
No,
I did
anybody.
Okay, so I just pulled up what is required from the Brevard Sheriff's Office. And of course, it's just age, US citizen, high school graduate, not have any convictions. This brings me, and I think, I lament that our previous guest was not able to join us. I think the sheriff would, or excuse me, the chief of police would be very equipped to answer this. But I did just want to speak. I think this touches, quality of officers. Are they getting trained well? Well, in response to, of course, all the scrutiny on police officers across the country since 2020, a lot of studies have actually shown that, expanding the type of training, increasing their access to de-escalation training, all these things that we initially at the first stage of the Black Lives Matter movement, this is what we were fighting for. Increased training, more de-escalation, body cams, dash cams. Well, it turns out that a lot of those things don't fix the culture. And so I think that Alton, we spoke like it's more systemic than one bad apple. It's like a rotten tree in a lot of departments. And so what we do when we speak about divestment at the ACLU is that we're trying to shift resources. And I think this is where I don't think it's about training. I think it's about changing the culture and then empowering the community to really step up and fill the gaps that the police leave. And so that's just my response. And I will drop, I've got the link right here to the Brevard Sheriff How to Become a Police Officer website.
Indeed. Excellent. And I tell you what, it's something I think everybody recognizes, and that is our society is looking to police to solve issues of homelessness, mental illness, drug addiction, spouse abuse, and racism, and all these things. And many of these things, of course, police officers are not prepared or qualified to manage, and therefore looking at the bigger picture is a good thing to say. How can we solve these issues, allow police to do police work, looking at crime and that sort of thing. Anyway, we got another hand up here, and that is for Jan. Jan, you've got the floor.
Hi there, everyone. Jessica had said one of her action items was to do jury duty if you have an opportunity to. And it may not seem like an important thing, but I've actually had the opportunity to be on 6 or 7 trials myself in my life, which is really unusual. Not that there are many people that only get to do one in their life. I've done many. And every time I've been on a trial, the jury never just said, screw the guy, we'll put him in jail, who cares? They agonized over their decision every single time. Over all these years that I was on all these trials, it was really a good thing for me to see. And what it told me is it showed me how the judges are important, the lawyers are important. They have such an impact on the success or the non-success of the trial. But for all intents and purposes, my experience has been that the jury system works. And I mean, you may look at other things that are not quite right in this country or not quite right in our system, but that is one of the ones that does. And so I agree with you, Jessica. Jury duty is a critically important thing. That's
And you
it.
had a question. You had a question that you wanted to ask one of our panelists?
No, it's just a comment. Sorry, Phil.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much. Our next questioner, David Avila, you have the floor. If you can unmute yourself. There you go.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate you guys doing this because I'm a victim of police abuse. I don't know if anybody's heard about my arrest where I was in front of my house working on my car and I was taken to jail in handcuffs and had to bond out for doing an oil change on my own car at my mom at the time, my mother's house. And this went on until 2006 when I ultimately moved out of Palm Bay, Florida. And since then, I haven't had a single arrest or a single ticket. But while living in Palm Bay, Florida, I was arrested approximately 31 times, ticketed so much so that I lost my license for 10 years. And it just goes to show that the policing in that area, I mean, in the training, they arrested me for things like an undercover cop would knock on my door. Hey, would you work on my car? I live across the street. And then arrest me for running a business without a license. And all of this stuff is on 18th Judicial Circuit Court corruption. I have the documents, the videos, I have them. Police pulling tasers on me. I mean, that's why I see some of this is what I've been looking for since I moved out of Palm Bay, somebody to talk to, somebody to let you guys know what's going on and what can I do? I filed it as a tort claim. I have it in open court as a tort 052022CA044263 is the case number. But I don't know how to go any further. I don't have the resources, the money to hire an attorney. So what does someone like me do when a situation like this arises? And I'm still fighting it since I moved out of Palm Bay. I now live in Cocoa, and I can't say it's a perfect life. I'm still, I got my first trespass warning, and I'm sorry for jumping all over the place, but I'm starting to do my own First Amendment audits. It's my way of providing accountability and transparency, trying to show, like what Officer Stephen Hush from Palm Bay Police, snatching the camera out of my hand was illegal. But I mean, I could go on and on. I literally have so many corruption issues that I just don't know what to do about, and I'm glad you guys are here, and hopefully you can feel for, what I'm going through and help me with the answers that I just can't find.
And David, we're glad that you're here as well. These are good questions, and I'm not sure who on our panel would like to pick up the a reply. If you feel targeted, if you feel that you've been targeted by the police, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I get these calls every day, unfortunately, and it does happen locally, and Palm Bay is known to be one of the worst ones. And there really is, I mean, and that's why I was speaking to how difficult these cases are and how difficult they are for attorneys to financially carry as well, which is on purpose. And then you have the added problem locally is that there's not very many attorneys that are willing to stick their necks out for people just because of the influence of the big guy. I refuse to say his name. It's like saying Satan's name. I didn't say that. This is recorded. Anyway, so, but, so many people attorneys I can't tell you how many other attorneys and judges come up to me and are like, we love what you're doing. It's great, blah, blah, blah. Let us know if we can help behind the scenes. But nobody is willing to stick their necks out. And so I don't know what we can do as a community to empower attorneys, because you don't have the right to an attorney on these kind of cases. I mean, it's not like a criminal case where you have the right to an attorney. I mean, you either pay someone or you find someone like me who's willing to do it for free. At this moment in time, I'm contingencyed out. I mean, that means for months I have, my budget is such that I can't take any more contingency cases. And so I've had to turn away person after person. That's why I bring up, I brainstorm a lot, like what is the solution? Since I know that there's attorneys that would do it if they could financially and if they could get brave, basically. That's why I sometimes wonder about creating, a nonprofit that is some sort of go-to for people, helps people with public records requests and things of that nature. But right now, that's just a thing that's bouncing around in my head. So I don't have a good answer for you, David. You're not alone. That's the sad thing. But there is no good answer. And so people who call me that I can't take their case, I just tell them to continue to make complaints to the police department. Hopefully if an officer gets enough of them, something will happen with it. But if they don't have a citizen oversight committee like Coco does, I don't know. So yeah, it's a hard situation, David.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And Jessica took the words right out of my mouth. Complain every time. A lot of people talk about injustice as a result of policing. But a lot of people get mishandled by police and don't file a complaint. Complain every single time. I've had officers, when I have a major felony case where the case depends upon the truth and or honesty of the officer, I will pull their jacket to have the list of complaints against them. And several cases have been dropped, or really sweetheart deals have been made by the state attorney's office when I made these requests and I pulled the jackets of these officers and was able to give to the state attorney, hey, yeah, I understand that this officer is the officer that you want to use to prove these charges. but he has 20 complaints for racial discrimination. So let's make sure a jury hears that and see what they think about it. And so complain every single time, and talk to city councilmen as well. Lobby to city councilmen on your behalf as well, because they do have the power to speak with the chief of police directly, and what they say to the chief of police and what they say to the city attorney does make an impact, or can have an impact, depending upon the circumstances. So lobby to your city councilman and complain every time. That's all I got. And I'm sorry about what happened to you, David. Keep fighting a good fight.
And I know the ACLU is also a good resource. And one of the things that we often recommend to people is the newspaper. We're very fortunate to have Florida Today, who will pick up these kinds of stories and help at least publicize them. I am terrified by the day that we no longer have a local paper. If those of you that are still with us are not subscribers, I highly recommend at least partial subscription to the Florida Today. They have served our community well, in my opinion. And we do have one more question. It'll have to be our last question because we're running out of time. Cindy, you have your hand up. Cindy, you have the floor. What's your question?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm probably going to be outnumbered here. I have more of statements with one question at the end. I'm outnumbered in this forum, but I wanted to listen. I'm a police wife, have been a police officer's wife 25 years. He did his career at one agency. And as Mr. Edmonds was speaking regarding pulling his file or jacket, his is very, 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 very thin. Maybe 2 disciplinary over his 25-year career, minor issues, backed his car into a speed bump or a pole or something like that was one of them that I remember. I've been with him for his entire career. But I would like to say his career started, or his mind started leading towards the police officer career when his sister was murdered. She was a victim of murder when he was 15 years old. He was a serial killer. She was victim number 2, happened in Washington State. Unfortunately, they do not have the death penalty there. So this gentleman, I don't even want to call him a gentleman, this piece of crap, will live his life in jail without parole, any chance of it. Furthermore, I would like to say that most police, I would say maybe 98% have no problems with body cams. None whatsoever. It protects them. It protects the citizens. It protects everybody across the board of who said what, who did what, when it happened. It's a protection for everybody. My family, my husband are wholeheartedly for body cams. His agency did have had body cams. So obviously that rules out the sheriff. He was not working for the sheriff. But I would like to say that someone had mentioned regarding qualifications of police officers. It's obviously now an ever-changing way of how they are qualified and what's needed. The problem that we're running into now is everything that's happening, as you guys have mentioned. We're not getting qualified candidates because they're scared of people turning them in, them being recorded for misdoings, or what the citizen thinks are misdoings. They're afraid to do their job and what they were trained to do for what the citizens may think of them. And then it's recorded, and then it's all over social media, and then it in the public eye it looks bad. But per their training, it was per their training. It was to a T to their training. So I wanted to bring that up. We're not getting the best candidates right now. We're getting crappy candidates. I hate to say that. And I told my son, who could be a police officer, absolutely do not be a police officer. Do not follow in your father's footsteps. And he is very well qualified. He's very smart. I would have no problems with him going into the military or being a police officer. But absolutely, I told him no, because of all of the problems that are happening. They're not qualified to be doctors or solve homelessness or unruly kids at home. That's not what the officers are for. The de-escalation, yeah, of course, 25 years ago, they didn't have de-escalation, but over the years, he's gone through multiple de-escalation trainings. As a wife, I don't feel that it's safe for someone that is qualified in de-escalation and has all that training to be out on the road or to go for those calls. It changes so quickly. Those calls can change so quickly. Those people are, they're not in their right mind. The people so now not only does the officer have to worry about himself, he has to worry about the person that's with him or shows up on scene to try to de-escalate. And then he also has to worry about the person that he's there to try to help in whatever way, fashion, form that may be. So that's some of the things I wanted to say. Now, my question, and I'll be happy to take. My husband has retired. He retired after 25 years. He did not want to retire. He worked his last 8 years as a detective. He was a sergeant of the detective division. He absolutely loved his job. He absolutely loved getting the bad people off of the street that were causing harm to us citizens, the killers, the people that would rob and steal and murder people. It didn't matter if they were black, white, Hispanic. He didn't care. He was all about getting justice for the victims, just like himself, which drove him to be the police officer. So that's kind of my background. I'll be more than happy to take questions regarding my life and our life and what's going on. I have no problem saying he worked for the city of Cocoa. Alton Edmonds, you're more than welcome to come on board because I'm going to be asking you a question. He worked for the city of Cocoa. The reason he left was because of the chief. The chief in any department will run off good officers. Any leadership, yes, lean forward. Any leadership that is bad will run off good officers. And that's what's happening with Cocoa. And I feel bad for the officers that are still there that are my friends. And you know, that's what I'm going to say about that. I'm not going to speak for other officers that are still employed with the city, but I can speak for my husband that is why he left.
And Cindy, we are just about out of time, but I was going to say
okay,
your question is directed really toward Alton.
Yes. So now,
go ahead. Cindy, I think you might have been cut off.
He's muted.
Cindy, if
okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, Alton, is it a conflict of interest for you to be representing an officer for the city of Cocoa in which you're on the board, the police advisory board? Is that a conflict of interest?
Well, thank you, Cindy. Then there you go, Alton. You've
I
got
just
your
wanna
question.
jump in, and I just want to say that I'm not sure that, you know, the point of this is educational, and I don't think investigating Alton's connections is the point of this. But thank you. I hear Cindy, and I just want to speak to the point that she made about social worker co-response. The whole point is harm reduction. You know, we're seeing these people as our neighbors, not as those people, and we're just trying to extend a helping hand. I do, of course, understand the safety concerns. That's why these social workers are highly, highly trained, and a lot of them are trained on how to use firearms and actually do carry firearms. So that's all I say about that. Thank you, Phil, and everyone here for hosting us. It was a gorgeous conversation. So
well, Phil, before we end though, I don't want to leave Cindy's comments hanging because I don't want the tone of this presentation to be as if we're attacking the police. I mean, the topic is policing the police and addressing the problems that we have with the police, but we don't have problems with good officers. And Cindy, I thank your husband for his good work. I love good officers. I love body cams. They do protect the officers. They protect my clients. They make my job a lot easier. We should all have body cams. You could not pay me enough to be a police officer right now, because I know that there's all sorts of stressors, because everyone is heightened up about the wrongs and the problems that we see, that there might be overreaction on both sides, and officers already have a lot to take care of. And they're not necessarily trained to deal with mentally ill people, and yet we expect them to do that. And that's where the dual response comes in. And yes, a social worker by themselves is not enough. So I don't want to leave this presentation as if, you know, we don't like police officers. I honestly don't think that we take care of our officers enough. I think they need to have regular vacations and mental health and to be taken care of so that they can properly serve the community. And that, you know, we don't have to have these conversations in the future, but we do now. So the topic is what the topic is, but I don't want to walk away from this presentation thinking that I or Alton or Quinn or anybody else are just here about attacking the police. I love a good officer. We have issues that we need to address, and I really appreciate everybody's comments.
Thank you. I could not have said it any better. Alton, would you like to have the floor?
Sure. That's an easy question to answer. When we talk about conflict of interest in the practice of law, we're talking about representing two parties that have adverse interest. I don't represent the city of Cocoa. And so representing an officer when I don't represent the city of Cocoa is not a conflict of interest. I can volunteer on a board and represent an officer. And I think the conflict of interest would be if I represent an officer and a disciplinary action of that officer comes before my committee, then I would gladly recuse myself if that were the case. However, the officer that I represent for the city of Cocoa that has been harassed incessantly by the family and friends of officers is actually a really good officer that has not had any discipline or disciplinary history since becoming a Cocoa police officer. And as a result, I don't anticipate that she will be someone that I would have to sit on the board to assess. But if she were, then I would recuse myself because that would be a conflict of interest. But at this time, it's not. And so I will continue to represent the interests that I see fit within the confines of the law. And I hope that Cindy isn't one of the people that's been harassing this officer due to her disagreement with this officer being on a member of Cocoa Police Department, because obviously, you know, that wouldn't be right. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate everyone having me.
I think it's also very important that the Space Coast Progressive Alliance is seen as a fair viewer of this. I think that we have always, for 20 years, examined these kinds of issues where we could help people. We could, where we've been an advocate for good, we have done so. We have had police officers on our board. We have worked very hard over the years to give our representatives in the police, as well as attorneys, state's attorneys, defense people, the floor to express their ideas and to provide a good, safe environment for that. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to do that in the future. We thank all of you for being here tonight. I want to thank everybody that's here. And I know we've got another question coming up here from Anthony, but unfortunately our time is complete, so we have to call it a night. But I think that everybody should give our panelists, Jessica Travis, Alton Edmonds, I'm going to get his name right here. Alton is his preferred pronunciation. So Alton, the thanks, Quinn Diaz, Dr. Joyce Hamilton. Thank you so much for being here tonight. A round of applause for all of you. And I really do. This is such an important topic. And again, we don't want this discussion to end here tonight. Action items. Recommended action items: file a public information request, a FOIA request on something that is important to you to understand how the process works and to basically expand our knowledge and our understanding of what's happening. Another action item: volunteer. Pick a subject, pick an area, pick an organization. I can tell you that the Space Coast Progressive Alliance is in need of volunteers, and I know the ACLU is as well. And frankly, we we desperately need more people to be involved in their community, to get up off the chair, if it's only one night a month, do something. The third action item, which was actually several of them, was learn about Black and brown issues in your community. Look at the Partners in Freedom Fund that the ACLU is having. Become an active observer in the event of something in your neighborhood. If you see an event, record it, pay attention. Don't be just a passive observer. Don't just sit and watch television and throw things at the TV and be unhappy. Those are key and I think wonderful action items. Again, thanks to all of you. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to those of you that are taking the time to watch this on YouTube. Our next program will be the first Thursday of July. That's July 6th. It will be a disability rights program. This is, again, another critically important issue for our community. I thank you so much for being here tonight. And we say good night for now. We'll look forward to seeing you again. That will be Thursday, July 6th. Thank you to all of you. Good night. Thank you for being here.